Okay, so now that we have flattened off a face, we have squared an edge to that face, now we're ready to start bringing this board down to its thickness, to the dimension that we need its thickness to be. So what we're going to do for that, I'm going to grab a marking gauge, I'm going to set that gauge fence to whatever thickness I need it to be, and then I'm going to go around and score my line all the way around the edges and the ends of this board, being sure that the fence is always riding on this reference face that I've created here. So that's why this face is so valuable. So we're going to run along there, scoring that line all the way around. And I've got a nice little line that I can watch and see going all the way around this whole thing. And I will be planing down to that line. I've got a good amount of material that I need to remove. So the first plane I'm going to turn to, again, is going to be my foreplane. This is really where the foreplane excels at removing material rapidly. If I were trying to do this all with my triplane, it would take a very long time because it's taking a very light shaving. But the foreplane can take a much heavier shaving and really take this material off very fast. So let me just make sure that I've got the grain direction going just the way I want it to. Get this all set up. All right. And then just start scrubbing down. I'm not going to scrub material down all the way to the line. I do want to leave just a little bit so that I can smooth out that final surface to my line. So I'm going to take away material fairly quickly now. Again, working across the grain helps me with speed, meet much less resistance from the wood. Do want to check periodically to be mindful of your line. Make sure that you know where you're removing, so it's a little thicker on one side of the board than the other. So I want a little heavier cut here, remove just a little less material on the other side. All right, and then back to okay, so I'm very close to my line at one corner, not quite there at the other corner, so I do want to be mindful of that. Don't take off too much material there. I'm just going to make a mark for myself so I know, don't plane that just yet. I don't want to lose that in there. Okay, so I like that. I've still got just a little bit to go to get to the actual line. See if there's a good spot to see here. But there is just a little bit of line left, a little bit of wood to remove to get down to the line so I can clean that up nicely, get it down there. So I'm going to start to use my triplane to even out that surface, get it all good and smooth. work it down. Now what I'm going to be watching for as I do this, the marking gauge when scoring that line has created a little bit of a dimple in the wood. And eventually when I get to the line, I'm going to create a little feather of a shaving, just a little string of wood that's going to peel off of the sides right where that gauge went in. And that's what I'm going to start to look for. In fact, there's a little piece starting to come up in a couple of spots here already. There's a good one. Right down in here. If you listen closely, you can hear that snapping sound. That's just a feather shaving of wood still hanging on where the marking gauge cut. And that's what I'm looking for to tell me that I'm to my line. And I'll be able to see that show up all around the board. And eventually, there'll be the slightest little bevel that'll come once I remove that I'll be able to see around the whole thing. It tells me I've made it to my line. We're in a good spot. Now it's not uncommon at this point to find that because of that foreplane, you've got spots that might reach that bevel a little earlier than other spots. Just be careful with your planing. Right now I've got a little more thickness here, a little less to remove there. So I'm going to take shorter passes to get this down, but I'm starting to get that little flap again. In fact, that little piece just came off, that little shaving of wood, to get that there. All right, so that looks pretty good. And you'll be able to see it all around the board where you get that shaving. I can still feel a couple of spots. There we go. From the triplane, or from the foreplane. I'm going to leave this where it's at. If I can come in really close on this, you can kind of see there are just a little bit of splinters of wood, little shavings of wood just peeling up. I've got my marking gauge line and it isn't quite exposed right at this point. I can see some of those fibers coming up, but I'm essentially down to my thickness of my board to do this and get this all even. And I've got that same exposure all the way around all the corners of this face. That tells me that this face should now be parallel to my other face. So now I've got a board that's equal thickness all the way around, just from getting it down to that marking gauge line. So the next step after this will be to make the ends 90 degrees to both the edge and the face. I like to do the ends next, so the order here so far has been plane one face, get it flat, that's your reference. Plane an edge flat and 90 degrees to the first face. Now I'm going to parallel the other face to the first face. So I plane that down, so now this is all one even thickness board. The next step is going to be the ends of the board. I want to square those up, make them 90 degrees to both the reference face and reference edge. The last thing I like to do is then parallel the other edge. And the reason for that is When I'm planing the end grain, I might get a little tear out. When I plane off this edge, I can remove that tear out and avoid any damage to the board that way, get everything looking good and clean. So let's move on to working on the end grain here.
If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking, come take a class at our school in Earlysville, Virginia. You can also visit our website at woodandshop.com, where you'll find a bunch of free woodworking lessons, workshop tours, and our very popular tool buying guides. And make sure you subscribe to our free newsletter to get our latest articles and videos. Enjoy!